I can't believe in anything anymore. Liddy clutched a heavy stack of books and walked briskly through the sun-drenched corridor. Her skirt swayed with every step, and the stray lock of hair atop her head bounced. She tightened her arms, her fingertips pressing firmly against the books. Byrne leaned against a stone pillar, raising a hand in greeting. A smile played on his lips as his gaze fell upon the hurried figure. "Were you going in such a rush?" Liddy came to an abrupt halt, her eyes flickering with unease. Ilo, I'm going to deliver some documents to the high priest." Byrne narrowed his green eyes slightly, leaning closer to her face. The small braid at the end of his hair brushed against his shoulder. More importantly than that, Byrne reached out and hooked his finger under Ludi's chin, forcing her to look up. "Want to go on a date with me? I turned down invitations from every other girl for you, you know?" A book slammed heavily onto the top of Byrne's head. "Ouch! What was that for?" Byrne clutched his head and protested loudly, his features twisting in pain. Carl pushed up his black-rimmed glasses, clutching his own documents tightly. "Stop bothering Lulu while she's working. How could you hit your adorable younger brother like that?" Byrne pointed at Carl and shrieked. Carl's expression remained cold. "You're not adorable at all." Ludi, still holding her books, gave a slight bow with a polite smile on her face. "Thank you very much for your concern." Carl watched her in silence, the gaze behind his lenses flickering slightly, but he said nothing. "Humph." Carl crossed his arms and turned his face away, avoiding her eyes. "It's not like I helped you for your sake. Found you, Lulu." Haynes suddenly lunged from behind, his arms wrapping tightly around Ludi's shoulders. Ludi let out a startled cry, nearly dropping the books in her arms. "Why are you with the Greengrass twins?" Haynes asked, tilting his head. Byrne and Carl instantly petrified, as if swaying blades of grass had sprouted from their heads. "Greengrass?" Haynes released his grip. His silver hair fell over his forehead, and his eyes were lazy and glazed. "If you're free, do you want to take a nap with me?" "Oh, well." Liddy laughed awkwardly while clutching her books. "Actually, I'm not free at all." Haynes' shoulders slumped, his expression turning instantly dejected. "Hey, get away from Lulu. Who are you calling Greengrass?" Liddy continued walking with her books, a helpless smile on her face. "You guys are too noisy." Haynes sat behind her, muttering in a low voice as heavy footsteps echoed. "You're all too loud. As the four holy knights, your behavior is utterly disgraceful." A hand clad in a white glove reached out, steadily taking hold of Ludi's shoulder and pulling her into his embrace. Jerlin looked down at the group. "Do not harass my attendant. She's not just your attendant. How shameless. Lulu is clearly my Lulu." Ludi lowered her eyes, a bitter smile playing on her lips. "I can't believe in anything anymore. This is all too ridiculous. They were supposed to hate me, but somehow we become this close. But what I find most unbelievable is the person who murdered me is among them. I will find that person and uncover every single lie with my own hands." Ludi lay in a coffin, her hands folded over her chest, surrounded by white flowers. Her eyes were tightly shut, her face peaceful as if in a deep sleep. "What is this? Why can't I move?" The cemetery was filled with people dressed in black, their low whispers floating through the air. I never expected the saintess to pass away so suddenly from illness. Lady Ludi had only been ordained for a year, right? Died of illness? What does that mean? Am I dead? Suppressed discussions broke out among the crowd. "Actually, there's a rumor that she was assassinated, isn't there? Lady Ludi had a terrible reputation, didn't she?" "Yeah, that loose saintess. I heard that to get the position. That she slept with all the high-ranking royals and officials. Calling her a tarnished saintess is an understatement. She was just a prostitute." Ludi's tightly closed eyes twitched slightly as a fire of rage ignited within her. "This is too much. I'd heard the rumors, but this is just cruel. Since entering the temple, I haven't even held a man's hand. To think I'd be treated like this even after death. When I was 10, I was just a child living in an orphanage. My name was Ludi Flora. That was the day I was brought into the temple and became the saintess. The saintess is the guardian of the Holy Spirit arts, responsible for protecting the entire kingdom. Usually, those with the power of purification are noble women, but I was born with an abnormally powerful holy strength. And so, overnight, I became the saintess. My status as an orphan bred resentment, and rumors spread like wildfire. Women in the shadows whispered to one another, malice festering in the dark. Even the four holy knights, who were supposed to protect the saintess, were filled with loathing for me, casting sharp, and disgusted glares. My guards had long since abandoned me. Words pierce her back like blades. Even so, everyone at the orphanage was happy for me. Ludi ran toward the cheering children, opening her arms to pull them into a hug, a bright smile on her face. That was her only solace. Ludi looked down at the pendant on her chest. Mother Shirley, no matter how much pain I suffered, I endured it. I worked hard to play the role of the saintess. Ludi knelt alone beneath the massive spirit tree, her silhouette looking small in the vast, empty temple. Countless specks of light flickered between the branches. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she gripped her pendant tightly, her knuckles turning white from the force. Suppressed sobs escaped her throat, but then a blade instantly pierced through her chest. Blood splattered in the air like petals. Ludi's body jerked and stiffened, her pupils contracting violently in the shadows as warm liquid stained her white robes red. Ludi's pupils contracted sharply as the cold blade ran through her chest. Blood spilled from the corner of her mouth, staining her pure white collar. Huh! The figure in black stood behind her, gripping the hilt and thrusting downward. Ludi fell weakly to her knees, her long hair spilling into a pool of blood. I remember now. I didn't die of illness at all. I was stabbed from behind while I was praying. Who was it? Who on earth was it? A hand in a black glove reached out, crudely snatching the necklace. Fingertips brushed against the blue gemstone. The necklace was torn away by force, the metal chain snapping in the air. Despair filled Ludi's eyes. Stop! Stop it! Ludi reached out toward the receding figure, her blood-stained fingers trembling as she grasped at the void. Give it back. That's something very important. Tears fell from the corners of her eyes, mixing with the pool of blood on the floor. That's right. I was murdered. Why? How did it come to this? I endured everything, only to end up with such a miserable death. Even the pendant my mother left me was stolen. What was my life even for? To die like this? Ludi's eyes snapped open, her cyan pupils trembling violently. Are you kidding me? Ludi bolted upright, bracing one hand against the edge of the coffin. This is absolute nonsense. She roared in anger. Even if I have to crawl back from hell, I will curse that killer for all eternity. A saint is casting a curse? How rare. Cyanex walked in slowly. You're quite lively for someone who has died once. Ludi froze in place, her pupils shrinking in shock. High priest. Ludi looked down at her hands, her fingertips lightly touching her chest to feel the beating of her heart. I am alive. It seems the resurrection spell was a success. Cyanex tilted his head slightly, a hint of a smile in his eyes. I apologize for making a suggestion the moment you've woken up, but Cyanex took a step forward, elegantly opening his palm. Would you be willing to cooperate with me? To find the one who murdered you. Ludi pressed her hand to her chest, her pupils trembling with shock. A resurrection spell, and teaming up with the high priest to catch the killer. Cyanex spread his arms, his robes swaying in the light. He was the youngest high priest in the temple, holding not only a high position in the sanctuary, but also great influence within the royal palace. He walked among the believers holding a thick tome. He had a profound mastery of holy power and was the only one who had ever recognized. My potential. Cyanex stood under the giant tree, looking down at the young Ludi. Even with his busy daily schedule, he was the only one who cared for me. You must be very confused right now. Cyanex touched his chest, a reassuring smile on his lips. I will explain everything later. When I found you lying there, Ludi's long hair had been scattered across the cold floor, blood staining the marble tiles. He had held Ludi in his arms as a complex golden magic circle appeared in his palm. I cast the resurrection spell known only to the high priest. Ludi looked up at the man before her, confusion in her eyes. So that's how it was. You saved me? Thank you, high priest. Cyanex turned around, his long hair falling down his back. The resurrection succeeded because you possess immense holy power. However, until you woke up, you were in a state of suspended animation. I forged the illusion that you died of illness. I even held this funeral, all to deceive the enemy. Ludi pressed her hand to her chest, her fingertips trembling slightly. The enemy. Cyanex reached out to steady her arm. You were stabbed, weren't you? Ludi lowered her eyes, her voice barely a whisper. Igriagis. Ludi's eyes were filled with shock. It was likely, pierced by a knight's sword. A long sword hovered within a blood-red mist, its blade wrapped in a crimson aura. That was a holy weapon that only the chosen 4 holy knights could touch. The sword rejected everyone but them. Ludi, clench her teeth, cold sweat sliding down her face. So, the person who killed me must be one of them. Cyanex looked directly at Ludi. I don't believe this assassination was carried out by one person alone, Lady Saintis. Behind the knight who stabbed you, there is likely a mastermind pulling the strings. Ludi gripped the front of her clothes. A mastermind? Cyanex folded his hands in front of him. I believe this involves a massive conspiracy. In the worst-case scenario, it may have been orchestrated by the nobility, or even the royal family. Ludi held her breath, her pupils contracting with fear. She stared ahead, falling into a deathly silence. Cyanex closed his eyes. As the high priest, I will never allow anyone to threaten the temple. He suddenly clapped his hands, the crisp sound echoing in the room. Therefore, I want to cooperate with you. Ludi rested her chin in her hand, her eyes thoughtful. I see. I understand. Since the Saintis is officially dead in the records, you can move freely now. Go find the truth. You want to use this information to drag the real culprit out. Ludi suddenly clenched both fists, her eyes burning with resolve. Of course. Let's do it. Cyanex was slightly taken aback. While I admire your decisiveness, isn't the speed of your decision that a bit too fast? Ludi swung her arm. No, this is exactly what I want. No matter the cost, I will do it. I'm going to expose that bastard. Ludi ground her teeth. I'll make him kneel before me and apologize 1,000 times. She pressed her hand to her chest, her gaze turning calm. I will definitely take back. Point pendant. Cyanex helplessly closed one eye. Lady Saintis, your personality seems to have changed quite a bit as well. Ludi pressed her hand to her chest, a curve forming on her lips. This is the real me. That's right. I don't have to force myself to play the Saintis anymore, nor do I have to endure that unfair treatment. From now on, I'll do whatever I want. Cyanex stood to the side, watching her cheer. You look much better now than you did when you were the Saintis. Ludi stopped her movements and turned to look at him, a hint of surprise in her eyes. Cyanex gave a gentle smile. The current you is very reliable. I'd like to ask you to keep a low profile for a while, to investigate those knights. Though we need to take things step by step. Ludi tilted her head slightly. So what exactly should I do? Cyanex held up his index finger. The most effective way is to change your appearance and become an attendant to the 4 holy knights. That way, you can infiltrate their inner circle. Ludi's eyelids lowered, her pupils trembling slightly. Those 4 men were the nation's idols. A group of heroes possessing immense martial power. People on both sides of the streets cheered wildly, flowers carpeting the road for the hero's return. Ludi pressed her hand to her chest, her brow furrowed. Even just approaching them as a caretaker is terrifying. What if I get caught? Especially by that scary guy. Cyanex looked directly at her. First, I will have you become Jerlin's caretaker. She stood frozen on the spot, the stray hair on her head drooping limply. She fell into a long silence. Ludi's eyes suddenly widened. Please wait. Jerlin Lilac? She spread her hands in front of her, looking panicked. He's the one who hates me the most. The real Purple Reaper. He achieved great military merit in the war a few years ago and was appointed as a holy knight. Though he is an exceptional knight, his personality is cruel and heartless. Ludi pressed her hand to her forehead and closed her eyes. If it's that man, he wouldn't hesitate to kill me. Cyanex held up a finger, smiling brightly. You will be responsible for his daily life, from his meals to his baths. Win his trust first. Ludi shook her head frantically, her hands waving in the air. Absolutely not. That's impossible. I'll just be killed by him all over again. Cyanex tilted his head, his smile radiant. Didn't you just say you were willing to pay any price to achieve your goal? Ludi puffed out her cheeks and let out a muffled hum, her eyes full of frustration and conflict. Carl walked along the corridor, turning his head toward his companion. Hey, Jerlin, I heard you still don't have a single attendant. He spread his hands, his tone flippant. Why not find one? It would make life much easier. Should I introduce you to a beautiful woman? Jerlin roughly brushed Carl's hand away, his gaze ice cold. I don't need such things. If anyone actually shows up claiming to be a caretaker, I'll throw them out myself. Jerlin turned around, his cape cutting a sharp, cold arc in the air as he strode deep into the corridor. If anyone dares to bother me. Jerlin turned his face sideways, his purple eyes filled with chilling intent. I'll cut them all down and throw them out. 3 days later, Ludi stood before Grand Annex. This was where Jerlin Lilac lived. She looked down to inspect her outfit. Her blue and white made skirt fluttered slightly in the wind. I've changed my appearance, but I still can't relax. Am I really going to take care of that terrifying man from now on? Jerlin's cold face appeared in her mind, his purple eyes full of malice. Ludi hunched her shoulders, wrapping her arms tightly around her chest. I did make a bold declaration to High Priest Cyanex that I'd do anything to achieve my goal. Liddy looked up, her eyes wavering. Can I really do this? I understand the caretaker plan, but Liddy lightly touched her hair. With how I look now, they won't recognize me, right? Especially with this long hair. Although I always wore a veil before, they had no interest in me anyway. Maybe this is actually better. Especially Jerlin. He really hated me. Jerlin, that. Jerlin stopped in his tracks, glancing sideways with a cold gaze. Liddy fidgeted with her fingers. I want to go to town, so I'd like to ask you to escort me, but how should a saintess even speak? Jerlin stood silently in front, his back radiating aloofness. Jerlin's eyes were filled with disgust. You're always trying to read the room. If you don't have official business, don't talk to me. He whipped his cape around and strode toward the end of the corridor. Just looking at you makes me irritable. Liddy froze on the spot, her pupils trembling with fear, her hand clutching weakly at her chest. Even if I was annoying when I was the saintess, was it really necessary to be that harsh? She ruffled her long hair, screaming inwardly. What a cold-hearted man. Cyanex looked at Liddy with a gentle expression. Regarding your appearance, you don't need to worry. After losing your holy power, your hair and eye color will change. To bring you back to life, we consumed a massive amount of divine energy, so Liddy suddenly looked up, pressing both hands to her chest. What? So my hair color is going to change soon? Cyanex nodded slightly, a hint of regret in his eyes. Yes, it was such a beautiful color. I am Trudisore. Cyanex lowered his eyes, his fingertips twining through Liddy's long hair, his gaze filled with melancholy. Why are you apologizing? Liddy raised her face, looking into the high priest's eyes. If you hadn't brought me back to life, I wouldn't even be standing here. She gave a brilliant smile, her tone light. Compared to my life, hair color is but a small price to pay. Even so, hair is a precious thing for a woman, isn't it? You really are a strange person. Sometimes you're intimidating, and other times you're so considerate. Liddy stood beside him, finding it all a bit mysterious. You're just like a mother. Cyanex stiffened. Who are you calling a mother? She pressed a fist to her lips and coughed softly. If you truly don't mind, then that's fine. Liddy touched her long hair, her gaze becoming determined. Actually, I don't care about my hair at all. More importantly, do you have a ceremonial dagger? Cyanex took a dagger from his waist, confusion in his eyes. I do, but what do you want it for so suddenly? Liddy took the hilt, her fingers gripping it tightly as she suddenly drew the blade from its sheath. The sound of metal on metal was sharp and piercing. Liddy grabbed her long hair and held the dagger across it, the blade resting against the strands. Cyanex's eyes widened, and he lunged to stop her. What are you doing? The blade sliced through the purple hair, which fell in thick clumps. The hair scattered in the air. Liddy gripped the dagger's hilt, her eyes full of resolve. Since I'm starting a second life, I might as well do it thoroughly. To be honest, this feels much better. Cyanex pressed his hand to his forehead and closed his eyes helplessly. What admirable decisiveness. By the next morning, her hair color had completely changed. Liddy stared at herself in the mirror, her pupils contracting in shock. Blonde. I'm not the saintess anymore. Now, I'm Jerlin's caretaker. Wearing her blue and white maid uniform, she walked through the empty corridor, her footsteps echoing on the stone floor. To get the pendant back and find the true culprit, Liddy clenched her fists, her knuckles turning white. First, I have to make him like me. She stood before the heavy wooden door, took a deep breath, and pushed it open. Excuse me, Lord Jerlin. Liddy puffed out her chest and announced loudly, as of today, I have been assigned as your caretaker. The room was deathly silent. Liddy froze at the door, a drop of cold sweat on her temple. Liddy knocked lightly on the door, a placating smile on her face. Excuse me? I'm a new caretaker, Lulu. There was no movement inside. She stopped smiling. No one's coming out? They said someone was coming to visit today. The saintess and the 4 holy knights lived in separate annexes. Usually, they were staffed with 5 or 6 caretakers, but Jerlin had rejected everyone, living alone in the empty palace. Liddy rested her chin in her hand, her brow furrowed. No matter how stubborn Noble is, can one person really manage life alone? Isn't a mess in there? She puffed out her chest and put her hands on her hips. In that case, I have to use that trick. Cyanex had jingled a silver key in his hand, the metal clinking crisply. If that stubborn fellow won't respond, use this. He narrowed his eyes with a gentle smile. This is a palace managed by the high priest. Here's the spare key. Just go right in through the front door. Liddy gripped the silver key, a smirk forming on her lips. Since Lord Cyanex is playing along, I'll take it without hesitation. She inserted the key into the lock, the metal clicking into place. First impressions are everything. I have to be cheerful enough. Liddy stood before the door, took a deep breath, and pushed the heavy double doors open. Pardon the intrusion. I am a new caretaker. Liddy suddenly stopped, the lock of hair on her head bouncing as her pupils contracted in confusion. What was that sound just now? Jerlin leaned against the doorframe. His weight shifted forward. A white glove covered most of his face, and his eyes, visible between his fingers, were ice cold. He clenched his teeth, a vein throbbing in his temple. I came out to see because it was too noisy. You seem to have a death wish. Liddy froze as a chill ran down her spine, cold sweat sliding down her cheek. Forget making him like me. Am I going to die a second time? Jerlin crossed his arms and looked down at her, his eyes filled with disgust, as if he were looking at a piece of bothersome trash. Liddy shook her head violently, her hands gripping her skirt. No, I can't give up. She straightened her back, her gaze becoming firm again. Please allow me to reintroduce myself. I have been appointed as Lord Jerlin's attendant. Jerlin stood before the tall door. I don't need an attendant. His eyes were cold, his pupils trembling with anger. Go home. Liddy pressed her hands to her chest and leaned forward. Please don't say that. I will definitely be useful to you. Jerlin turned his head, his brow furrowed with annoyance. Your mere presence is a nuisance. His defenses were incredibly thick. Jerlin crossed his arms and looked down at Liddy. Just how did you get in here? Liddy stammered, her eyes darting around. She pulled a silver key from her pocket, her fingertips trembling slightly. It's the key the high priest gave me. Jerlin swung his arm, snatching the key away. He slammed the heavy door shut. Liddy stood dazed outside the closed door. He actually locked me out. A smirk formed on her lips, and her gaze sharpened. This is going to be a war of attrition. Bring it on. Liddy clenched her fists. I'll show you my true power. I'm the record holder for praying 24 hours straight. I won't give up so easily. She began to appear frequently, trying to win Jerlin's favor. Lord Jerlin, I brought some freshly picked apples. Would you like to try one? Jerlin, who was about to head out, was startled by Liddy suddenly popping out from the bushes, his shoulders jerking. Where are you going, Lord Jerlin? Liddy waved her arms behind him. Good work today, too. Do you really not need an attendant? You again? Jerlin stopped at the end of the corridor, leaning against a stone pillar. He pressed his white-gloved hand to his throbbing forehead. What is with that woman? Hayne. Dot sat on the stone steps, clutching a bag of cookies. She comes to pester you once every 3 days, right? It's almost every day, Jerlin corrected him. That's some incredible persistence. Hayne crunched on a cookie. The previous saintess died of illness, right? That means until a new saintess is chosen, we're free. Why don't you just hire her? Jerlin remained silent, his finger pressed to the bridge of his nose. Cookie crumbs hung from the corner of Hayne's mouth, his gaze becoming playful. Though there are rumors the saintess was actually assassinated. Jerlin closed his eyes. I don't plan on letting anyone get close. Hayne popped another cookie into his mouth, the crunching sound crisp. Well, getting involved with someone like me won't do her any good anyway. He licked the crumbs from his lips. His eyes drooped lazily. Jerlin is such a headache, too. I bet that girl's persistence will win in the end. Jerlin countered expressionlessly. That day will never come. The next day, it poured rain. Water lashed against the spires and leaves. Jerlin pulled his cape over his head and walked quickly through the courtyard. This rain came at a bad time. He stopped abruptly, his pupils contracting in shock. At the end of his vision stood a figure. Liddy stood alone before the main gate, her arms wrapped tightly around her chest. Her thin clothes were already soaked through. Lord Jerlin. Liddy looked up, a brilliant smile blooming on her face as if the surrounding storm that didn't even exist. Jerlin's hand, clutching his cape, froze in midair. Have you been standing here in the rain this whole time? Liddy jogged up to him, desperately shielding a red book in her arms. Lord Jerlin, you're finally back. I received a letter from the high priest and had to deliver it to you personally. From her robes. That she pulled out the envelope, her fingers shaking violently from the cold. The envelope had been protected well and wasn't wet at all. Please take it. Jerlin stood dazed, instinctively reaching out to take the letter. Okay. Liddy's fingers were pale and weak, still trembling uncontrollably. Jerlin stared at that frozen hand, a hint of shock flickering in his eyes. The errand is done. I'll head back to the dormitory for today. Liddy turned around, her body swaying as she hunched her shoulders and let out a loud sneeze. She struggled to steady herself, turning back with a weak smile. I'll be back again tomorrow. Jerlin stood on the steps, watching Liddy's staggering figure as she left, his teeth clenched, his chest heaving. Wait. Jerlin reached out and grabbed Ludi's shoulder. Through the soaked fabric, his palm felt the icy cold of her skin. Ludi turned back in surprise, her pupils trembling slightly. Even I wouldn't turn away a woman who's soaked like this. Jerlin avoided her gaze, his voice stiff. Kumein. Ludi stood, dazed as rainwater dripped from the ends of her hair. Jerlin pushed open the bathroom door and pointed at the white bathtub. Heat the water yourself. Use whatever towels you want. Leave as soon as you're warm. Yes, Ludi answered softly, her hands fidgeting together. She looked around the magnificent bathroom, steam spreading against the window. I never thought I'd enter the palace this way. Does Jerlin actually have a gentle side? I really will catch a cold if this continues. Ludi stood in the middle of the washroom. Since he said so, I'll take him up on the offer. She retreated. She took off the soaked, made uniform, and stood before the mirror. Her fingertips lightly touched the skin below her collarbone, tracing the stigmata. It was the proof of being chosen as the saintess. Even if her appearance changed, this mark would remain for life and never fade. To hide her identity, she could never let anyone see this. She pulled up her slipping collar. Oh, right, Gran said as he pulled back the curtain, holding folded clothes in his hand. Wear these for now, while yours are being washed. Ludi spun around abruptly, her thin towel barely covering her chest, her pupils trembling with shock. Gran froze in place, his gaze locked onto her chest. His purple eyes suddenly constricted, and a bead of cold sweat formed on his temple. Ludi instinctively raised her hand to cover her heart. He had seen it. Ludi let out a scream and recoiled sharply, her shoulders shaking violently. Gran quickly turned his head away and raised his white-gloved hand to shield his eyes, a flush rising to his cheeks. I'm sorry. He placed the clothes haphazardly on the table and rushed toward the door. I'll leave the clothes here. Ludi clutched her chest tightly, her heart pounding incessantly. A faint light shimmered from her chest. What should she do? If he saw the stigmata, her identity as the former saintess would be completely exposed. Ludi walked barefoot down the hallway, her hands tightly gripping her collar. Forget about getting on good terms with Gran. If he discovered she was the former saintess he hated most. An image of Gran swinging his sword flashed through her mind. She had entered his home without permission and even used his bath. Ludi raised her hand to her forehead, her brow furrowed with exhaustion. Just imagining the worst-case scenario gave her a headache. Perhaps she was too tired. She hadn't eaten since morning and had been caught in the rain. She dragged her heavy steps toward the window when steady footsteps suddenly sounded behind her. Hey! Ludi spun around, her eyes wide and her mouth agape in surprise. Igriagis. Gran stood a few steps away, his gaze lingering on Ludi for a moment before shifting elsewhere. Gran raised a hand to his forehead, his fingers brushing through his hair. About what happened just now. I'm sorry. He lowered his eyes, looking slightly awkward. It's been a long time since I've had a visitor. I forgot how to be considerate. Ludi waved her hands frantically, her body stiff. No, it's fine. It's okay. Also, I saw it. The scar on your chest. Ludi's pupils suddenly contracted, and her breath hitched. He really did see it. Gran tilted his head slightly, his voice low. As a woman, having such a prominent mark must be very difficult for you. Ludi froze in place, her hands death-gripping her collar. What? Gran raised his white-gloved hand to his lower lip. I won't tell anyone, so please rest easy. Ludi stared at his profile, her eyes full of shock. He didn't recognize it as the stigmata. Instead, he's being considerate of me? That's impossible. He's the Purple Reaper. Ludi nervously fidgeted with her fingers. If you could keep it to yourself, it would really be a big help. Suddenly, a loud growl erupted from her stomach, the dull sound echoing through the hallway. Ludi froze, her face instantly turning beet red. The air fell into a dead silence. Ludi suddenly doubled over, covering her face with her hands. I'm sorry, this is so embarrassing. Gran's mouth opened slightly, his expression hesitant. Are you hungry? Gran reached out, grabbed Ludi's wrist, and pulled her forward. Come here. She was led to a spacious dining room. Ludi sat alone at the end of the long table, looking around at the empty chairs. He really lived alone in this big house. This feeling of loneliness reminded her of her days as the saintess. Ludi looked down at the tidy tabletop. Everywhere was spotless. Could it be that he even did the cleaning himself? All four paladins came from noble families. and Gran was no exception. Liddy held her spoon, lost in thought. For the eldest son of such a family to handle chores personally, no matter how much he hated people, to reject others to this extent, there must be a reason. Steady footsteps approached from a distance. Sorry to keep you waiting. Gran was wearing a black apron, carrying a large tray. It's just something simple. Eat. Liddy looked up, her eyes sparkling. She let out a gasp of wonder. She looked at the steaming stew in front of her and the sliced bread. Could these be? Liddy looked up. Did you make all of this yourself? Gran crossed his arms over his chest, his expression flat. Yes. He lowered his gaze slightly, his lips pressed thin. If I leave it to others, who knows when I might be poisoned? Liddy picked up her spoon and scooped a piece of meat. Thank you for the meal. She put the food in her mouth and chewed carefully, her eyes instantly lighting up. It's delicious. It's really delicious. Gran looked down at her, watching her stray hair swaying as she ate. How should he put it? His brow twitched slightly, a hint of helplessness flashing in his eyes. She was just like a puppy. Gran raised a hand to the back of his neck, irritably scratching his hair. Damn it. Once he thought about her being hungry, he couldn't just ignore her. Continuing to reject this girl seemed to be getting harder. Liddy was gulping down food, her cheeks puffed out, her hair trembling with her movements. Gran watched her profile, his expression somewhat dazed. What am I thinking? It can't possibly be her. He slowly reached out, his fingertips hovering above the ends of Ludi's hair. But still, she looked too much like her. Gran leaned down, his large palm cupping Ludi's chin, forcing her to look up. Let me see your face more closely. Ludi let him hold her chin, her deep blue pupils shrinking slightly. Lord Gran? Ludi hurriedly raised her hand to touch her face. Is there stew on my face? Gran quickly turned away, his arms tightly crossed. No. There isn't. Ludi looked down at her empty plate. What was that feeling just now? Even though he had a strange personality, he had a considerate side. Perhaps she could slowly get closer to him now. She suddenly froze. Wait, with this level of domestic skill, does he really need a caretaker? Right now, I'm the one being taken care of. Ludi shook her head vigorously, tossing aside the negative thoughts. She couldn't give up like this. She pushed back her chair and stood up, bowing deeply to Gran across the table. Thank you for the meal. I've caused you a lot of trouble today. I am truly sorry. She took a deep breath, staring at Gran with burning eyes. I want to repay your kindness. So next time, Gran began gathering the dishes. You don't need to cook. He turned his back to Ludi. But I can leave the cleaning and laundry to you. Ludi looked up sharply. That means? Gran gestured with one hand. I haven't officially hired you. It's just a trial period. He turned his face slightly, his eyelids lowered to hide the emotions in his eyes. From tomorrow on, come whenever you like. I'll be waiting for you. Ludi's face instantly lit up with a smile, her stray hair bouncing happily. Thank you so much. She turned around and ran toward the door with light steps. Ludi raised her right hand high. I'll do my best. Suddenly, she stumbled, her palm pressing against her forehead. Her vision began to distort, her body feeling as if it were sinking into the deep sea. Dizziness. Ludi's eyes lost focus, her pupils trembling violently. Once she relaxed, the exhaustion came crashing down like a tidal wave. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed forward. Gran lunged forward, reaching out his arms. Hey! He caught Ludi by the waist, locking her tightly in his embrace. Gran looked down at the person in his arms. She really was identical to that person, the person in his memory, except for the hair color. If he looked at her face more closely, Ludi leaned against Gran's chest, her pupils trembling slightly. Looking at him like this, Gran really had a beautiful face. When she was the saintess, he always had a terrifying expression, but now, Ludi looked up at his face. If only he could smile. Is he the person I've been looking for? Gran lifted Ludi's chin, his fingertips resting against the side of her neck. Deep in his purple eyes was a look of scrutiny. Ludi held her breath as their gazes crossed at close range. An urgent knocking sounded at the door. Gran abruptly let go, his expression turning tense. A visitor. I almost forgot they said they were coming to pick up documents today. Ludi stood there flustered. Gran stopped, turned his head, and whispered a warning. Hey! Ludi shrunk her shoulders in fright. Yes. Gran pointed to the end of the hallway. Leave through the back door today. Your clothes are by the fireplace. Ludi agreed repeatedly and jogged toward the back door. Excuse me. I look forward to working with you starting tomorrow. Gran responded in a low voice. Yeah. Speaking of looking like someone, at first, he thought the saintess was that person. Their hair color was identical, and he always found himself overlapping their shadows. He frowned slightly, but their personalities were completely different. Gran's eyes turned cold. That's Saintus. Byrne crossed his arms over his chest. You're late. I've been waiting for 7 minutes and 29 seconds. That is the time you've wasted. He pushed up his glasses. As a paladin, you should act with precision down to the second. Gran walked into the manor hall. He was still the same. Still a nag. He handed him a stack of documents. Byrne reached out and took them. Byrne's eyes stayed on the documents as he asked, by the way, have you already hired a caretaker for the interior? Gran was startled. Huh? Byrne continued to stare at the papers. Hein told me you finally intended to hire one. Gran clenched his teeth. That meddling guy. Actually, I did just hire one. Byrne pushed up his glasses. That's none of my business. More importantly, I have something else to ask you. Regarding the suspicion of the Saintus being assassinated. Byrne stared at him through his lenses, his gaze cold. The person assigned as the guard on the day she died was your father, Gran. Grans pupils suddenly constricta. Byrne closed the documents in his hand. So what is the truth? Everyone knows the Purple Reaper loathed the Saintus. Lear despised her, and so did you. Someone with your cleanliness obsession must have looked down on that loose Saintus. Byrne let out a cold snort. There's no point in talking further. Although it's just suspicion for now, Byrne and I do have our doubts about you. Gran looked up, his purple eyes shimmering in the shadows with a cold intent. 3 weeks later, Cynic sat by the tea table, picking up an exquisite porcelain cup. Liddy sat opposite him, her hands resting nervously on her knees. So, how is life as a caretaker? Liddy looked down at her skirt, her expression looking a bit awkward. I've been being fed. Cynic stopped his movements, doubt appearing in his eyes. Being fed? Aren't you the one supposed to be taking care of him? Liddy looked up abruptly. Lord Gran's housework skills are simply too strong. Not to mention he keeps everything spotless. His cooking is amazing. I can't find a single thing that needs cleaning. She slumped her shoulders dejectedly. As a caretaker, I'm a complete failure. Cynics looked at her depressed state. Has the master-servant relationship been reversed? He picked up his teacup again and took a sip. I never expected Gran to have that side to him. Liddy sighed. I didn't expect it either, but you haven't forgotten the investigation, right? Of course not. She held up 2 fingers. There are 2 suspicious points about Gran. First, every 3 days at a fixed time, he goes out punctually. I suspect he's meeting the mastermind in secret. Cynics turned his head to watch Liddy as she drank her tea. And the second point? Liddy put down her teacup, her expression becoming serious. In Lord Gran's room, there's a small box he absolutely forbids me to touch. That box is tightly locked, and it seems to contain something very important. Liddy's eyes showed determination. I'm thinking my stolen pendant might be hidden inside. Cynics lowered his eyes. Although it's just a guess for now, it's certainly worth investigating further. Liddy turned her face. Tomorrow is exactly the day Lord Gran goes out. I plan to risk following him. Cynics raised his hand, which was wearing a half glove. In that case, he pressed his hands together. Pepe, a small pink beast, jumped out of thin air, letting out a clear cry. Liddy opened her hands in surprise. Is this a Holy Spirit? A powerful existence born from the Holy Spirit tree. Pepe landed in Liddy's palm, letting out a cheerful chirp. Liddy picked up the small pink creature, her fingertips touching its soft fur. It was rumored that Holy Spirits only contracted with high priests. This was her first time seeing a real one. Cynics narrowed his eyes and gave a gratified smile. Pepe is very smart and will surely be a help to you. Liddy held Pepe up to her cheek, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Nice to meet you, Pepe. Cynic's smile faded, his expression becoming solemn. Please don't push yourself too hard. Be careful in everything. The sunset dyed the sky red. Gran put on a black cloak and walked out of the manor gate, looking into the distance with a cold expression. Liddy hid behind a stone pillar, pulling down the brim of her hat, revealing only a pair of sharp eyes. Well then, let's begin. The tracking operation starts now. Pepe lay on her shoulder, wearing a matching mini detective hat. While following Gran, I must clear up the points of suspicion regarding the true culprit. There are indeed many suspicious points about Gran. That sealed wooden box, and those regular outings. Liddy's pupils trembled, her eyes filled with coldness. The most critical point is that on the day I died, Gran was my personal guard. During the prayer ceremony, he should have been guarding the entrance to the sanctuary. When Cynics arrived at the scene, the guard had long since disappeared. Pepe tilted its head and chirped. Liddy lowered the brim of her hat. If Gran is the true culprit, he could have fled the scene after the murder and easily fabricated an excuse afterward. Liddy extended her index finger and lightly touched Pepe's nose. But what if he isn't the killer? No matter how much Gran hated me as the Saintess, he wouldn't be like those lazy paladins and abandon his post. Ludi rested her chin in her hand. After becoming Gran's caretaker, I realized he is extremely serious in his work. Perhaps that day, he had a reason he had to leave. Someone took advantage of the opening when he left to take my life. He refuses to reveal his whereabouts on that day to anyone. This only makes the suspicion heavier. Ludi pressed her hand to her chest. In my current identity, I don't want Gran to be the true culprit. A golden pie emitted heat. Gran carried the tray, and Ludi peeked out from behind him, her mouth wide open in a gasp of wonder. Maybe it's because I feel we've grown closer. Ludi tightened her grip on her cloak, her fingertips trembling slightly. I must stay calm. I can't let personal feelings interfere with my judgment. Gran pushed open a heavy wooden door, the copper bell on the door ringing crisply. He bowed his head as he entered the building. Ludi hid at the corner. Lord Gran entered a shop. It's a flower shop. A wooden sign stood next to the flower beds, and various flowers filled the carts. Gran held a bouquet of blue and white flowers and slowly walked out of the shop. Ludi peeked out from behind the wall. Why is he buying flowers? That bouquet. It actually suits him damn well. Where's he planning to go? Stone crosses stood atop the graves, and rows of coffins slept in the mist. Gran, holding the blue and white bouquet, walked between the tombstones with a solemn expression. This is the cemetery belonging to the temple. Ludi hid behind a stone pillar, watching his back. What's he doing here? Gran stopped, standing before a tombstone. He gently placed the bouquet on the cold stone slab. Ludi's eyes flew wide. That grave. It's Ludi Flores. That's my grave. Ludi hid behind the stone pillar, her body stiff. What could this possibly mean? Gran stood before the grave, his right hand over his heart, bowing his head in silent prayer. Why would he come to pay respects to a saintess he was supposed to hate? Gran lowered his eyelids, his purple pupils hidden in the shadows of his hair, his expression full of grief. Hey, Ludi was startled. Come out. Did you think I hadn't noticed you? He turned sideways, his right hand on the hilt of the sword at his waist, his gaze scanning the stone pillar coldly. Come out. Ludi stepped out from behind the pillar. Gran turned around abruptly, his eyes filled with shock. How? Why is it you? Ludi bowed repeatedly. I am terribly sorry. I was just worried about where you were going. After all, I am your attendant. That excuse is terrible. She bit her lip, cold sweat forming on her forehead. Gran let go of his sword hilt and let out a long breath. I thought it was another assassin sent by my stepmother. Ludi looked up, her pupils wide with surprise. Assassin? Gran put one hand on his hip, his expression returning to indifference. Thinking about it, your killing intent is too weak. Ludi straightened her back, trying to break the awkwardness. Anivi, Ludi touched her chest, her eyes full of confusion. Why did you come to pay respects to the former saintess? I thought you hated her. The saintess was indeed cowardly, annoying, gloomy, and difficult to get along with. Ludi clenched her fists, the corners of her mouth twitching. Wow, that's some merciless insulting. Gran turned his face away, his hair messy in the wind. But she died under my protection. Whether it was a sudden illness or the rumored assassination, the responsibility lies with me for abandoning my post and failing to notice anything unusual. Ludi froze, her pupils shrinking slightly, her breath hitching. So, you feel guilty about the saintess's death, which is why you keep coming to offer flowers. Gran closed his eyes and nodded slightly. Yes, this can't atone for my sin, but I will keep coming at least until the mourning period is over. He was regretting it, regretting that as a guard, he failed to protect me. There wasn't a trace of a lie. I don't think Lord Gran is the killer. Ludi suddenly stepped forward, her leather shoes clicking on the stone tiles. Then, why would a responsible person like you? She rushed behind Gran, her hands tightly grabbing his sleeve. Why did you leave the saintess's side while on duty? This has always bothered me. I want to know everything about you, Lord Gran. Gran looked down at her, his pupils shrinking in surprise. What? Ludi gripped his collar tightly. Please tell me. Gran looked troubled, a drop of cold sweat on his temple. That's because, suddenly, a flash of light appeared, and a dagger sliced through the air. Gran turned his head sharply, his purple eyes focusing instantly. Watch out. 3 throwing knives shot out in a fan shape, whistling through the air. Ludi stood frozen, her body stiff. What? Gran lunged to the side, his long arm pulling Ludi into his embrace, using his back to block the incoming blades. The sharp edges pierced the fabric and sank into his flesh. Blood instantly splattered onto the ground. Gran gritted his teeth, cold sweat forming on his forehead as a muffled groan escaped his throat. Lord Gran, she cried out, her eyes full of shock. Ludi screamed, Lord Gran. Gran groaned as the dagger pierced his shoulder. He knelt on one knee, his right hand tightly covering the wound. Ludi pressed close behind him, her hands trembling as she supported his back. An assassin wearing a green top hat walked in, playing with another dagger in his hand. The blade was coated in a lethal poison. You're still conscious? As expected of the Purple Reaper. He gritted his teeth, his eyes cold. I have a poison-resistant constitution. Was this ordered by my stepmother? The assassin stopped, a mocking smile on his face. Something like that. Gran looked down and chuckled, his hair obscuring his eyes. That woman truly never learns. Ludi's pupils trembled. His stepmother. That meant Gran was being hunted by his own family. So this was an internal struggle within the Duke of Lilac's household. She bit her lower lip. More importantly, Gran was late because he discovered the assassins, and he even got hurt protecting me. Quick, leave this place. Ludi froze, her eyes full of shock. What? Gran turned his face, his breathing becoming heavy. Leave me here. The assassin thinks he's already finished me and is currently off guard. Cold sweat poured down his forehead, his eyes full of determination. I can't get you involved in my troubles. Go now. The assassin's lips curled up. My employer's orders. I must kill him. Don't take it personally. He raised a blood-stained dagger and approached Gran. Gran half-knelt on the ground, his purple eyes losing focus from the intense pain, cold sweat sliding down his cheek. Ludi's eyes were wide, her pupils trembling violently. She suddenly stood up and blocked the way in front of Gran, spreading her arms. Hey, Gran Chautif. He looked up at that back, his expression full of shock. I won't run away. Ludi shouted back. If I leave my master and run for my life, I would completely lose my qualification as an attendant. Gran froze in place, his mouth slightly open, staring blankly at Ludi. The assassin let out a snicker. A woman dares to resist. How noble and touching. He gripped the dagger and approached step by step. Cold sweat formed on Ludi's forehead. At this rate, we'll both die. What should I do? The assassin clearly looked down on her, thinking she was defenseless. Ludi quietly shifted her steps. I only need one chance. Suddenly, a pebble flew out and accurately struck the assassin's top hat with a crisp sound. The assassin suddenly ducked. Ow! What was that? He turned his head in shock to look around. Pepe flapped its wings and dove down, still clutching a stone, letting out a sharp cry. Phew! Ludi's eyes widened as she cried out, Pepe! The assassin turned sharply. Damn it, who's there? Get out here. Those without divine power could not see holy spirits. Ludi picked up a dagger from the ground. Good job, Pepe! She threw herself at the assassin, her arms locking tightly around the man's waist, using the momentum to knock him down. The two crashed heavily onto the stone floor. Wah! Ludi flipped over and sat on the assassin's chest, her right hand gripping the dagger near the man. The assassin's eyes widened, cold sweat sliding down his temples. This woman. Ludi's gaze was cold, her lips curled in a mock. You were careless. This blade is coated with a poison that kills on contact, isn't it? The assassin let out a snicker, his eyes full of contempt. You brat, do you really think you dare to stab me? Ludi burst out laughing. I'm someone who has died once already. My resolve is on a different level than yours. She suddenly swung her arm, the dagger slicing through the air. Ludi's face was expressionless, her eyes cold. Come back to find me when you're truly prepared to die. The assassin groaned and foamed at the mouth. Ludi ran to the fallen man. Lord Gran, are you all right? She knelt on the ground and supported Gran's head. The toxin was spreading. She had to help him detoxify quickly. If she still had her divine power, she could heal him in an instant. The Holy Spirit tree protected this land, and the Saintess's job was to clear dark energy. Purification power could remove all impurities and was equally effective against curses and poisons. Ludi's brow furrowed, but purification required holy power, and she had lost that power. Besides, in this emergency, only that method might work. Pepe tilted its head and let out a clear chirp. Choo! Ludi turned her head to stare at the Holy Spirit beside her. Pepe! That's it. Maybe I can borrow the holy power of the Holy Spirit. A light flashed in her eyes. Lend me your power again, please. Pepe closed its eyes, and its entire body burst with a dazzling white light. Phew! The light enveloped Ludi's palms, a warm sensation spreading through her body. Wow, this feeling, it's just like back when I was the Saintess. Normally, just holding the other person's hand would be enough. She looked down at the unconscious Gran. Even the past, that she only needed to do that much. But here, she needed deeper contact. The fastest way was mouth to mouth. Ludi suddenly covered her mouth, her cheeks instantly turning red. They always call me a shameless saintess, but this really is my first time. I can't worry about that now. This is basically just artificial respiration. Ludi clenched her fists. Saving a life was more important. She reached out and held Grand's face firmly with both hands. She still had too many things to ask him. Ludi leaned down. Close your eyes. You must not die, Gerlin. I lived with my commoner mother, and our days together were filled with poverty. There were only the two of us. The moment my mother passed away from illness, Gerlin lay prostrate by the bed, weeping loudly, calling out a name that could no longer respond. Heavy footsteps approached. Leather shoes stepped on the wooden floor, making a cold, hollow sound. Gerlin stopped crying and turned around abruptly, his face still stained with tears, looking at the uninvited guest. People from the house of Duke, Lilac, appeared to take me away. My mother had been a maid at the Duke's mansion, the Duke's mistress. On her deathbed, she had begged my father to take me in, but there was no place for me in the Duke's residence. The Duchess suddenly swung her arm, and a heavy slap landed on Gerlin's face. You lowborn brat. Gerlin's head was knocked to the side, and he let out a muffled groan, his body losing balance as he fell to the ground. The Duchess looked down at him from above. I heard you stole my son's candy. This is exactly why I hate thieves who try to show off. I didn't steal any candy, Gerlin retorted, propping himself up on the floor, his eyes filled with stubbornness. The Duchess's biological son hid behind her skirt, a successful, wicked smirk on his face as he let out a contemptuous giggle. It was another setup against me. Gerlin lowered his eyelids. The red mark on his cheek stung like fire. Everyone in this house was rotten to the core. My father had coldly taken me in, only to ignore me completely afterward. My stepmother saw me as a thorn in her side, and her son was just as despicable. Gerlin's face was always covered in fresh wounds. The Duchess waved her folding fan, pointing at Gerlin as she shouted, Pullman, lock this sewer rat in the shed. Gerlin curled up in the corner of the dark wooden shed. It seemed he would miss his equestrian lesson again. Though my father was cold, he was a thorough utilitarian. He arranged for me to receive a basic noble education only because he valued practical talent. Father announced that the position of heir belonged to the strong, whether it was me or my despicable stepbrother. The reason my stepbrother constantly framed me was likely because he was afraid I would take the position of family head. Gerlin suddenly swung his right leg, kicking over a wooden bucket beside him. To hell with all of this. The bucket rolled across the ground. It made a dull thudding sound. He turned to look at the opening. No one would come before nightfall anyway. In fact, no one would even remember him until tomorrow. Outside the shed, a pink sunset covered the horizon, and the shadows of the trees swayed in the breeze, appearing exceptionally peaceful. Gerlin lay flat on his back on the grass, limbs spread wide. Finally, he could breathe. How easy it would be if he could just run away like this. And live alone. But he knew very well that he had no ability to survive on his own. The sunset dyed the treetops red. Gerlin stared blankly at the sky, confusion in his eyes. Hey, a voice came from above. Gerlin let out a startled cry. Ludi leaned down, a basket full of purple flowers on her arm. Do you live around here? She leaned closer to Gerlin's face, her eyes showing concern. Your face is hurt. Are you okay? Gerlin froze in place, responding with a stutter, why yes. A girl from the town. She seemed completely unguarded. Wait a minute, Ludi said with a bright smile, I have something good. She rummaged through her basket and then reached out her arm toward Gerlin, giving him a bouquet of flowers. Gerlin looked down at the cluster of purple flowers in his arms, his expression somewhat hesitant. Ludi explained with a smile, the nectar of this flower can stop pain. Besides, it's very pretty, just like your eyes, right? Gerlin froze, a flush rising to his cheeks as his pupils trembled slightly. Ludi waved her hand and turned to leave. Well, goodbye then. Oh, wait a moment. Why'd he stop her? He couldn't reveal his identity. He couldn't even say his own name. So how could he ask for hers? Gerlin suddenly stood up and shouted at Ludi's retreating figure. Will you come back here again? If we can meet again, please let me repay the kindness of these flowers. Ludi stopped her pace and looked back with a brilliant smile. I come here to pick flowers at this time every week. She waved her slender arm. Goodbye. Gerlin stood rooted to the spot, watching the girl's distant silhouette. Meeting that girl changed my suffocating life. The grassy slope at dusk was covered in blossoms. We had several brief conversations in the glow of the setting sun. Gerlin scratched the back of his head, looking a bit awkward. Hey, we meet again. Without exchanging names or revealing identities, we became secret friends. Ludi gently placed a woven flower crown on top of Gerlin's head. This suits you. Gerlin looked down, avoiding her gaze. No, it probably doesn't. Ludi took Gerlin's wrist and began wrapping white bandages around his wound, layer by layer. It's your arm this time? Did you really just fall? Gerlin avoided her eyes, stammering in response. I'm just clumsy. Her bright and cheerful personality saved me countless times. In those days, I wasn't Gerlin Lilac. I was nobody. Ludi and Gerlin lay side by side on the grass, their hands tightly interlaced. Only when I was with her did I feel truly alive. But losing everything often takes only an instant. Gerlin was violently kicked to the ground. His stepbrother stepped on his spine, roaring from above, "You bastard! You actually dared to sneak out alone? You really are a filthy rat." The stepbrother gritted his teeth. His eyes were full of loathing. Gerlin let out a muffled groan as he was crushed underfoot. They must have discovered that hole. Damn it, I've already told Mother. The stepbrother lifted his foot and kicked him hard in the stomach again. Don't even think about getting your freedom back. The sound of heavy impacts echoed in the room. Gerlin curled up on the floor, letting out a cry of pain. The stepbrother snorted, straightened his clothes, and left without looking back. Gerlin's face was pressed against the cold floor. His pupils began to lose focus, and his vision blurred. He would never see her again. We had clearly promised that next time we met, she would teach me how to weave flower crowns. Gerlin closed his eyes. What was the point of living such a miserable life? The reason you're in such a wretched state is because you're too weak, Gerlin. The Duke looked down at the boy on the floor, his gaze cold. If you don't want anything else to be taken from you, then seize power. As long as you become the heir to the Duke's house, you can have everything you want. Gerlin snapped his eyes open, his pupils trembling. Everything I want. Her hand surfaced in his mind, Ludi's. The warmth from her fingertips, as she held his hand tightly, was the only reality he longed to grasp. I believe you have potential. The Duke stood with his back to the boy, his cloak flapping in the cold wind. Climb up using your own strength. Gerlin's fingers suddenly clenched, his nails digging deep into the dirt. I will. I will gain the status and power that everyone must acknowledge. Once I seize the position of family head, I can go to see her officially. If I do that, they will hate me even more, perhaps even while my life. Even so, Gerlin snapped his eyes open, purple flames burning in his pupils. I will never look back. No matter what, I must live on, to see her again, until the moment we reunite. I will formally introduce myself to her. So, could you tell me your name first? Gerlin reached out toward the moon, his fingertips seemingly trying to pierce the night to capture that illusory light. He suddenly snapped his eyes open. Gerlin sat up in bed, the blanket sliding down to his waist. He looked around at the unfamiliar furnishings. Where is this? It turns out it was a dream. I dreamed of the past. What exactly happened to me? He felt a weight on his left hand. His gaze slowly moved down to the edge of the bed. Ludi, Dot was fast asleep by the bed, her blonde hair scattered over her arms, her fingers tightly interlaced with his. Gerlin's pupils suddenly constricted, and his heart pounded against his chest. Lady, Ludi's eyelashes fluttered as she let out a blurred murmur, slowly opening her eyes. Gerlin propped himself up, looking down at her. Ludi suddenly raised her head. Lord Gerlin, you're finally awake. Gerlin looked around, confusion in his eyes. Where is this? Ludi hurriedly stood up and leaned in, her expression concerned. This is the temple infirmary. Gerlin's brow furrowed as memories slowly resurfaced in his mind. Where's that assassin? What happened after that? Ludi raised her index finger. Help arrived after that. Ludi leaned closer to the bed. That assassin. I got lucky and managed a successful sneak attack, I guess. Gerlin turned his head, suspicion in his eyes. So, you were the one who took care of them? Just you? Ludi lowered her head, her shoulders slumping as she let out a guilty sigh. Gerlin raised a hand to cover his nose and mouth, his shoulders starting to shake. Puffed. He suddenly threw his head back and burst into a fit of laughter. Ha ha ha! You really are an interesting fellow. Ludi froze in place, a flush rising to her cheeks, her ahogue twitching on her head. Gerlin pressed a fingertip to his lower lip, a smile playing on his face. Speaking of which, I haven't asked for your name yet. Ludi's eyes widened, and she let out a cry. Huh, you didn't know until now? Jerlin spread his hands, looking composed. It's not like not having a name affected our communication. Ludi lowered her head, her fingers fiddling with the strands of hair by her ear. My name is Lulu. Please just call me that. Jerlin gazed at her face. Lulu, that's a nice name. Jerlin leaned back against the headboard. This isn't the first time my stepmother has sent assassins. As the son of a mistress, yet a potential threat to the family inheritance, I'm in their way. She even put poison in my food. If I were the only victim, it would be fine. Jerlin had drawn his sword to protect the carriage. His subordinates had been dragged into it as well. No matter what happened, the Duke's power, that would cover everything up. Jerlin lowered his eyes. My father believes that if I die, everything will end. So, he turned a blind eye to my stepmother's actions. Ludi covered her mouth, her eyes filled with horror. That's terrible. So this was why Jerlin that kept others at a distance. He didn't want anyone else to be dragged into his mess. Ludi gazed at Jerlin, her pupils trembling slightly. Jerlin leaned against the headboard, his expression calm. He's actually a gentle person, isn't he? Jerlin's gaze became sharp. As long as I can officially inherit the position of family head, I won't let her have her way anymore. Ludi folded her hands over her chest and lowered her eyes. I still can't believe he's the one who killed me. I must confirm my final doubt. Ludi looked up, meeting Jerlin's gaze. By the way, that little box he said I absolutely must not touch. What's inside it? Jerlin suddenly froze, pressing a finger to his lips as his eyes began to wander. That. Inside are dried flower bookmarks. Those are treasures from his childhood. A young Jerlin sat at a desk, opening a thick book, and a bookmark with a small purple flower slid out. Ludi folded her hands over her chest, her pupils trembling. Dried flower bookmarks. Could they be the flowers from her memory? Looking at him, he didn't seem to be lying. Jerlin covered half his face, a blush creeping up to his ears. She had long, pale purple hair. She once said the color of those flowers was exactly like my eyes. I heard the deceased saintess had the same hair color. She was a commoner, an orphan. I once hoped she was Cilia, but their personalities were completely different. Looking at her was like looking at my former, weak self. Jerlin's brow furrowed as irritation welled up inside him. So, he had treated her coldly in every possible way. Thinking back now, it was nothing more than taking his anger out on her. Jerlin covered his forehead and closed his eyes. Clearly, I was the one with unrealistic expectations, yet I took my frustration out on her. Jerlin leaned forward, holding the back of his head with both hands. I've done a bad thing. Ludi's hair color was also completely different. No matter how similar their appearance or personality, I shouldn't harbor those expectations anymore. Jerlin leaned closer to her face. You have more questions, don't you? Ludi suddenly pulled her shoulders back, her hands clenched tightly at her chest, her ahogue trembling. Before the assassin attacked, why would a responsible person like you leave the Saintess's side during your guard duty? Ludi took a deep breath and responded loudly, yes. Please tell me. The reason I left the Saintess's side that day was. A knock sounded at the door. Ludi suddenly turned her head. Is Lord Jerlin awake? The doctor pushed the door open. I need to do a quick checkup. Ludi slapped her forehead. Jerlin had only just recovered. I'm sorry for making you talk so much right after waking up. I'll head out first. Ludi lifted her skirt and ran quickly to the door, looking back and waving. We'll talk more later. Jerlin reached out, but before he could speak, the doctor opened his medical bag. She's quite a lively girl, isn't she? Jerlin gave a helpless response. However, your condition looks good. That's what's most important. The doctor looked down to examine the wound. Currently, the only symptom is this stab wound. With your recovery speed, it will heal very quickly. Jerlin lowered his eyes, his expression grave. Just a stab wound? I should have been hit with a lethal poison. He was still very confused. There were memories he didn't recall. The doctor pressed his wrist. Your pulse is a bit fast. Jerlin remained silent, lost in thought. Jerlin bit his knuckle. Damn it, Lulu. Ludi walked along the garden path, letting out a long sigh. I hope I didn't show any slip-ups in front of Jerlin just now. Although saving him was the priority, it was still too risky. Ludi leaned down, her lips meeting Jerlin's. It was just artificial respiration. Ludi covered her burning cheeks and shook her head frantically. Jerlin looked so much like that boy. I don't even know his name. One day, he just disappeared and never showed up again. Ludi stood under the high wall of the temple, looking up at the sky. Later, I became the Saintess. That was the last time we met. Ludi's foot slipped. Her heel kicked a hard object, making a crisp sound. Ludi lost her balance and pitched forward. Whoa. Ludi rubbed the back of her head, her brow furrowed. Ouch. Who threw trash in a place like this? Hein looked up, holding her steadily. This isn't trash. Ludi froze, her pupils trembling. This man was one of the 4 holy knights. Hein looked down at her, his gaze lazy. You are Hein Jandia, born into a prestigious knightly family, the youngest holy knight in history, and the strongest genius swordsman in the kingdom. Yet, he was a problem child with an eccentric personality and an irredeemable lazybones. Cold sweat broke out on Ludi's forehead, and her mouth twitched. He really is a problem child in every sense of the word. Back when I was the saintess, he caused me no shortage of trouble. Hein stared down at Ludi in his arms, a hint of doubt in his eyes. Hein leaned closer to her face, examining her carefully. I feel like I've seen you somewhere before. You're Jerlin's caregiver, right? Ludi's body stiffened, a drop of sweat rolling down her temple. Igriegajis. Hein let go of her. You're heavy. Get off me. Ludi suddenly stood up, clutching her skirt. I am very sorry. You said I'm heavy? Is it because the food Jerlin makes is too delicious, so I've gained weight? Hein brushed the dust off his uniform. It's quite something that you managed to become a caregiver through sheer willpower. I could never do such a thankless job. You seem to be working desperately hard to live, but it looks meaningless, doesn't it? Ludi froze. So this was the kind of person he was. Because he was so gifted, that he always unintentionally looked down on others. Probably no one around him dared to talk back. Before I died, I just silently accepted all of this. But Ludi looked straight at Hein, her gaze becoming firm. What exactly is wrong with working hard to live? Hein stopped his movements and turned his head. We don't know when we'll die. After all, we're justumans. Those who are innocently murdered are always caught off guard. Ludi clenched her fists so hard her knuckles turned white. If that's the case, then I have to give it my all even more. Ludi looked up, declaring loudly to Hein, I want to live a life with absolutely no regrets. Hein remained silent, quietly watching the girl before him. Ludi suddenly snapped back to her senses, realizing her blunder. Oh no, what did I just say? I actually talked back just now. My long-suppressed resentment completely exploded. She waved her hands frantically, a stiff smile on her face. Just kidding. Excuse me. Ludi turned to run, her skirt fluttering in the air. I'll take my leave now. Hein suddenly reached out and accurately caught Ludi's wrist. Wait. Ludi stopped and looked back, her eyes full of confusion. Hein leaned down, his face close to her ear. You're a bit strange. Ludi froze, her pupils trembling. Strange? Hein lowered his eyelids, gazing at Ludi's face. I can't quite describe the feeling, but I seem to want to talk to you more. Hein leaned in again, their noses almost touching. Is this what people call interest? Ludi held her breath, a flush rising to her cheeks. Wait a minute. Your face is too close. Heavy footsteps echoed in the corridor. Hey! Jerlin reached out and pressed a hand on Hein's shoulder. What are you doing to my caregiver? Ludi turned around abruptly, her eyes wide. Lord Jerlin, the doctor said I can return to the villa. While walking down the corridor, thought he had run into Lulu being pestered. I wasn't harassing her. Hein had a mocking smirk. The one who refused to let her be a caregiver was you, and now you're quite in a hurry. Jerlin was speechless, unable to argue. Hein spread his hands, his expression returning to lazy. Too much trouble. I'm leaving. Hein stopped his pace, looked back, and waved. See you next time. Jerlin watched the direction Hein had disappeared, his brow furrowed. How rare. Hein actually caring about someone else. Jerlin leaned in close. Are you okay? Ludi pulled her shoulders back, a stiff smile on her face. Mifine. You just chatted with me for a bit. Ludi lowered her eyes, her pupils trembling slightly. In that moment just now, he could have killed me at any time. He is one of the suspects. I must not let my guard. Dot down. Sunlight spilled over the gables of the villa, and the shadows of the trees swayed. Jerlin walked along the forest path, with Ludi following closely behind, carrying a heavy leather suitcase. Jerlin stopped and turned his head. As for the reason, I left the Saintess's side. At the time, I was on guard duty, but I heard a scream. Ludi stopped, her pupils trembling. A scream? Jerlin's gaze was deep. It was the voice of a young woman crying for help. I hesitated, but I couldn't just do nothing. So, I followed the sound, and ran over. I intended to go back immediately after saving the person. Someone dressed as a maid was sitting on the ground, her body trembling. Apparently, she and her lover had a fight. The lover had broken into the temple, and after they argued, he almost attacked her. but when I appeared, he ran away. Liddy followed closely behind Jerlin, her expression anxious. What did that woman say afterward? Jerlin looked grave. She begged me not to say anything, saying that if she caused trouble, she would be fired. Liddy was thoughtful. So, that's why Lord Jerlin remained silent. His behavior was logical, and I can understand that woman's situation, but during that time, I was murdered. This seemingly deliberate timing. That is very suspicious. If that woman was the mastermind, that she predicted Jerlin's personality and staged a farce to lure the tiger away from the mountain in order to get rid of me. Bloodstains spread in her mind. I remembered something else. Jerlin stopped and turned his head. Liddy looked up. What is it? Thinking back now, that woman wasn't a maid. I'm certain she was a caregiver, Heinz. Liddy froze, her pupils constricting violently. Could it be? Serenix held a hairbrush, his fingers moving gently through her hair. Liddy sat on a round stool, holding Pepe in her arms. I'm just here to report on work. Why are you helping me brush my hair? Serenix had a smile in his eyes. I heard that the place where divine power is strongest is in the hair. After your hair color changed, I had you cut it short, and I've been regretting it ever since. At least let me help you take care of your hair now. Liddy pulled her neck in, her gaze flustered. I understand. Serenix noted the strands. However, it's grown quite a lot in such a short time. When people are young, they always grow very fast. Liddy smiled. The way you talk really sounds like a mother. A bead of sweat hung from Serenix's temple. Who are you calling mother? Pepe lay in Ludi's arms, his ears twitching as he let out a soft sound. Serenix lowered his eyes. I see. I've understood the course of events. So, based on your judgment, Jerlin is not the true culprit. He's been cleared of suspicion. Hein has become the next target of investigation. He's the new suspect. Sweat broke out on Ludi's forehead, her gaze serious. Yes. The woman who assisted the mastermind is very likely Hein's caregiver. He's the one who could most easily give the orders. Serenix gripped the hairbrush, his expression cold. I will personally confirm that woman's identity. We need to make arrangements to transfer you away from Jerlin's side to serve as Hein's attendant. Ludi's pupils trembled and her fingers stiffened. I understand. This meant she, that no longer needed to stay by Jerlin's side. But parting always feels lonely. Liddy looked down and rubbed Pepe's ears. How should she tell Jerlin? Wait, he'll be fine even without me, right? After all, his houseware skills are impeccable. Ludi's pupils shook. He might even feel relieved. That thought was quite a blow. Serenix stood behind Liddy, placing a palm on her shoulder, his expression concerned. What's wrong? Liddy waved her hand, a forced smile on her face. It's nothing. Now is not the time to talk about loneliness. I've already decided that I must catch the true culprit who murdered me with my own hands. A week passed in a flash. Liddy pushed open the heavy door and peeked halfway in. Lord Jerlin? Sorry to intrude. She stepped into the room, her leather shoes making a light sound on the wooden floor. As it turns out, a whole week has passed, and I still haven't been able to tell Jerlin about the transfer. Lord Serenix had already notified Hein. A scent wafted by, and Liddy stopped, her nose twitching. What a delicious smell. Jerlin stood before the stove, holding a frying pan in one hand and a soup spoon in the other to taste. Steam rose before him. He turned his head, a gentle look in his eyes. You're here. Your hairstyle has changed. Liddy raised a hand to her temple, responding a bit awkwardly. Yes, I wanted to change my look occasionally. Lord Serenix is very particular about these things. An attendant's appearance is also important. Jerlin's lips quirked up as he gazed at Liddy. I think it suits you. Ludi's cheeks flushed, her pupils trembling. Jerlin turned back to continue fiddling with the pots on the stove. Anyway, the timing is just right. I've just finished preparing. Liddy stood frozen. Finished preparing? The long table was covered with a white tablecloth. There was golden brown roasted chicken garnished with lemon and red berries, emitting steam. Pan-fried meat was neatly arranged, drizzled with a rich sauce, and accompanied by cubes of cheese. The aroma was overwhelming. Liddy stared wide-eyed at the lavish spread of food. This is amazing. You really put a lot of effort into this. Did something good happen? Jerlin propped the back of his neck with one hand, a softness in his brow. I haven't been able to officially apologize to you yet. Apologize? I'm sorry for getting you involved in my private matters. And thank you for helping me. Liddy froze, her pupils trembling. Please don't take it to heart. Liddy bowed deeply, her voice hurried. "I understand you are in a difficult situation, Lord Gerlin." Gerlin turned around, his expression becoming serious. "That's exactly what I want to talk about. That assassin. It seems he already reported to my stepmother that he failed to attack me." A man was kneeling on the floor, head down and trembling. The stepmother sat in a high-backed chair, gently waving her folding fan, her expression cold. Gerlin Lilac already has the strongest bodyguard. Ludi's hands froze in midair, her pupils suddenly constricting. The strongest bodyguard? Cold sweat broke out on her forehead, and her expression became blank. He couldn't possibly mean me, could he? Why would he say that? Gerlin folded his arms, his expression indifferent. He probably can't admit that he was defeated by a woman. My stepmother seems to have heightened her guard. There shouldn't be a second attack for a while. Ludi gently patted her chest and let out a long sigh of relief. That's a relief. Gran watched her, his gaze softening. "This is all thanks to you, Lulu." Gran reached out his hand toward Ludi. "These are for you. Please enjoy them." Ludi lifted her head, her cheeks flushed crimson. She gazed at the man before her. Gran braced his hands against the table, his voice low and deep. "And stay by my side. It's no longer dangerous. So, from now on, are you willing to continue being my attendant?" Ludi's breath hitched, her pupils trembling. "Oh no, what should I do? Gran needs me more than I imagined, and that makes me happy, but—" Gran lowered his head slightly, his hair veiling his eyes. "Now is officially the best time to bring up the change of attendance. I know that, but—" Ludi suddenly raised her head, breaking the silence. Please wait a moment. I just remembered I dropped something at the Great Temple. Can I go get first?" Gran stood frozen in place. All right." Ludi screamed internally as she ran away. "Excuse me." Gran raised a hand to scratch the back of his neck, still as scatterbrained as ever. He lowered his arm, a hint of a smile appearing in his eyes. "But that is very much her style." Gran turned and walked toward the kitchen, pushing open the double doors. "I'll prepare another simple dessert before she gets back." He suddenly stopped in his tracks. Who was that person who just passed him in the hallway? "Hello there." Hein leaned against the corridor wall with one hand on his hip, letting out a lazy yawn. Gran pushed open the door and looked at the silver-haired man before him. "Hein, this is the first time you've come to find me of your own accord." Hein tilted his head slightly, his gaze indifferent. "I suppose so." He looked Gran up and down, his eyes lingering on the apron around the other's waist. "What's with the apron? Are you joking?" Gran's face instantly flushed red as he gripped the edges of the apron. It's not what it." He frustratedly scratched the back of his head. "What do you want? Just say it, Hein." The corners of Hein's mouth curled up into a meaningful arc. "It's about that attendant of yours." Gran's brow furrowed, his purple pupils suddenly constricting as he stared intently at the man. Hein lowered his eyelids, his gaze lazy yet mocking. Soon, she won't belong to you anymore." Gran's face darkened, a chill emanating from his eyes. "What do you mean by that?" Hein tilted his head back slightly, his lips curling into a provocative smile. "That girl, I'm taking her." Ludi walked alone through the woods, letting out a long sigh. Gran's focused gaze flashed through her mind. "So, from now on, are you willing to continue being my attendant?" Ludi lowered her eyes. I couldn't give him an answer, so I ran away. I should have told him about the change of attendance then. But how could I say it in that situation? He even cooked for me himself and is waiting for my return. It's hard to turn back now. A drop of cold sweat broke out on Ludi's temple. Her eyes filled with hesitation. Ludi stopped and hid behind a thick tree trunk, watching two people talking ahead. Those are palace officials. Two officials stood with their backs to the forest. One of them raised a hand to rub his temples. The successive years of crop failure and the damage caused by monsters have started to appear. It's truly a headache. Ludi held her breath, her pupils trembling. Crop failures? Monsters? Could it be? The Holy Spirit tree is accumulating miasma. This land was originally heavily polluted, so desolate that humans couldn't live here. It wasn't until the Holy Spirit tree appeared and absorbed all the miasma that the earth regained its vitality. However, if there is no saintess to purify the holy tree, the land will wither again. The monsters spawned by the miasma will sweep through everything. This is strange. Although there hasn't been a saintess since she died, the rate of miasma accumulation is too fast. Monsters have already appeared. Senex never mentioned any of this. Did he hide it on purpose so I wouldn't feel pressured? Is everyone at the orphanage doing okay? If the previous saintess, Ludi, were still alive, would things be different? Although she had a bad reputation, she did possess powerful divine strength. Perhaps we all misunderstood her. The official's brow furrowed, cold sweat appearing on his forehead. It's too late to say that now. Liddy turned her face away, her eyes filled with loneliness. Are you only realizing this now? The official lowered his voice. I heard the successor is Minister Hines' daughter. Who knows how that'll turn out? Liddy hid behind the tree, her pupils shrinking. So, the next saintess is Erica. Erica Hine. Her divine power was second only to mine among the candidates. With her prominent family background, the position of saintess should have been hers for the taking. But I snatched that position away. Since then, she viewed me as a mortal enemy. She was the leader of those trainee priests and the mastermind behind the rumors of the saintess's debauchery. Liddy stood in the woods, her finger pressed against her lower lip. Was she the mastermind? It doesn't seem like it. That group were just small fries. Hey, you over there. Erica stepped forward. Erica walked in with two attendants, her gaze sharp and condescending as she scrutinized Liddy. Liddy's pupils contracted. I'm no longer Liddy, so why am I still being targeted? Erica pointed forward and questioned loudly. You're Lord Grand's attendant, aren't you? Liddy hunched her shoulders, her eyes full of panic. Yes. Erica stood with hands on her hips. Her two attendants spoke aggressively. How did you seduce him? To think you'd curry favor even before the saintess candidates. An attendant crossed her arms with a sneer. Who cares if you're a distant relative of the high priest? This is simply too rude. Liddy froze, her eyes widening slightly. I almost forgot. That was the identity Senex fabricated, claiming I was his relative to the public. While the four holy knights are all highly esteemed, only Gran has always kept his distance from everyone. Liddy raised a hand to her chin, her eyes reflecting helplessness. It's natural they'd be unhappy that someone like me suddenly became his sole attendant. How did I do it? Liddy held up an index finger with a bright smile on her face. I just went to his villa every day until he finally hired me. Erica froze, her pupils shrinking. What? She suddenly clenched her fists, her cheeks flushing red as she erupted in a roar. Don't you dare cause trouble for Lord Gran. Liddy tilted her head, her expression subtle. She's surprisingly reasonable. One attendant suddenly rushed forward and shoved Liddy's shoulder. Liddy lost her balance and fell backward with a cry of pain. The attendant pointed at Liddy and shouted, "You're just a nuisance. Lord Gran is destined to be Lady Erica's knight. She is the next saintess." The attendant leaned into Erica's ear with a venomous look, suggesting, "Let's teach this woman a lesson like we did the previous saintess. Let's ruin her face or lock her up." Erica stood frozen, her pupils trembling and her fingers fidgeting nervously. The attendants' faces twisted as they let out shrill laughs. Anyway, Lady Erica is the minister's daughter and the future saintess. Anything she does will be forgiven, right? This is too much. There's no need to go that far. Liddy watched the farce before her, her expression one of shock. I always thought it was Erica, who was giving the orders. But looking at her now, Erica kept her head down, cold sweat on her brow, looking restless and uneasy. So the real masterminds behind the bullying of the saintess back then were actually them. Byrne stepped out from behind a tree, the dark pendant on his earlobe swaying gently. Oh, it seems you're all having a lot of fun. Byrne leaped down from the height, landing lightly amidst a flurry of green leaves. What are you doing? He stood before the group with one hand on his hip, a flippant smile on his lips. Liddy looked up, her pupils trembling and cold sweat on her brow. Erica stood frozen, a chill running down her spine. Lord Verne. Byrne walked toward the crowd, his hair swaying in the wind. I just woke up and saw so many lovely girls. What a pleasant surprise. He leaned in close to Erica, his gaze playful. Are you having a friendly girls' gathering? Erica's face turned bright red as her hands waved frantically. We were just... Byrne lowered his body, his lips curling into a dangerous arc. Or should I say, you're jealous of the one Gran is looking after, so you've ganged up to bully her? Erica stood frozen, her hands spread in panic. Cold sweat slid down the faces of the two attendants. Carl stood not far away with his arms crossed. Hey, so this is where you were, Byrne. You pushed the paperwork onto me again. Byrne straightened up and spread his hands. Saw thee. Everyone has things they're good and bad at, right? Carl let out a sigh. Enough already. He looked ahead through his lenses, his gaze sharp. Carl kept his arms crossed. So, what are the saintess candidates doing here? Erica stood frozen, her pupils trembling violently. The two attendants hid behind her, covered in cold sweat. It's nothing. The attendants suddenly turned and fled. Wait, Erica stopped and looked back with a complex mix of emotions in her eyes before running off again. Liddy held her chest with one hand, watching the receding figures with a puzzled expression. Erica, perhaps her true nature is completely different from what I knew when I was the Sanus. Liddy turned away, lowering her head in deep thought, a flicker of curiosity rising in her heart. Byrne leaned in. Carl adjusted his glasses. The two of them flanked Liddy. So your Grand's caregiver? You really do exist. Liddy turned her head sharply, her pupils constricting. To think I'd run into the Holy Night twins in a place like this. Liddy bowed respectfully. Thank you for your help just now. Byrne turned sideways and opened his palm, a casual smile on his lips. Actually, I didn't really do much. More importantly, Byrne leaned in, his gaze playful. How did you win Grand's favor? I'm really curious. So, how about having tea with me sometime? Carl crossed his arms and interrupted coldly. You're flirting again. Put away your shallow invitations while I'm not looking. He turned and walked away, his back looking resolute. I'm going back to work. Byrne spread his hands, looking helpless. You're too stiff, brother. He waved at Carl's back. See you later. Remember to say hi to Grand for me. Liddy stood frozen, her eyes closed and her expression numb. She walked alone toward the Grand Manor and pushed open the heavy white doors, her skirt swaying gently. In the end, it was just one accidental encounter after another. I didn't even have a chance to tell them about the change of caregivers. This is so awkward. She took a deep breath, her eyes becoming determined. But I must tell him properly this time. She pushed the door open abruptly and shouted, I am so sorry I'm late. Suddenly, a hand reached out and firmly gripped her wrist. Liddy let out a cry of surprise, her pupils dilating as she lost her balance and fell forward. The heavy white door slammed shut behind her with a dull thud. She was pinned against the door, unable to move. Grand braced one hand against the door, trapping Liddy between his arms. Liddy looked up, her eyes full of shock. Lord Gran? Gran lowered his eyes, his fringe veiling them, his voice low and raspy. After you left, Hein came by. Lulu, are you? His? Gran suddenly looked up. What nonsense are you talking about? Hein had his hands in his pockets, a lazy smile on his lips. I heard it from High Priest Senex. That girl's master is about to change from you to me. Gran stood frozen, his pupils shrinking as cold sweat slid down his temples. Hein spread his hands, his tone light. Isn't it normal for caregivers to change frequently? Mine are always changing. The corners of his mouth curled up in a meaningful smile. Usually, I just listen and let it go. But it's strange to intentionally replace someone you've finally found a liking for, isn't it? Gran's eyes were filled with gloom. A drop of cold sweat slid down his cheek as he fell into silence. Hein reached out to toy with the hair on his forehead. I want to ask the High Priest, he said. Senex folded his hands in front of him, his eyes slightly closed and his expression gentle. She is just a trainee who hasn't been at the temple long. She's being rotated to gain experience. But that's just an excuse. The truth is, that girl probably got tired of being by your side. Don't you think so? Gran stood frozen, his pupils trembling and his breath hitching. He suddenly turned toward Heinz, receding back. Hein waved a hand without looking back. Anyway, since she'll be my caregiver soon, say your goodbyes to her now. Liddy closed her eyes tightly, her brow furrowed. Hein, the High Priest went to the trouble of finding a reasonable excuse for the transfer. Don't go around fanning the flames like a troublemaker. Gran lowered his eyes, his gaze falling on Ludi's face with a complex expression. As expected, even if it puts you in danger, I still want to keep you by my side. Am I being too selfish? Liddy looked up, her eyes full of panic. No. Gran suddenly pulled her closer, his hands firmly gripping her shoulders. Ludi's cheeks flushed as her body pressed stiffly against the door. Hein was right. He stared into Ludi's eyes, his voice low and carrying a hint of vulnerability. Have you already started to hate me? Ludi held her breath, her eyes filled with helplessness and hesitation. I don't really hate you. Ludi clenched her fists and looked up, declaring loudly, if anything, my liking for you is growing day by day. You're not only an excellent holy knight, but also a diligent person. Even your cooking is so great. Gran froze, a blush appearing on his cheeks as he avoided her gaze. Wah! Liddy cupped her face with her hands, her eyes sparkling. Although I did get into danger, it wasn't Lord Gran's fault. Her eyes were filled with admiration. When you protected me, you looked really cool. That's why I truly... Gran suddenly reached out and covered her mouth. Enough. He avoided her gaze, looking flustered. I get it already, so be quiet. Gran let go of her, Sorry. He raised a hand to his forehead. I actually fell for Hein's provocation. So, is it really just to gain experience that the caregivers are being rotated? Yes. His expression became serious. Hein is a genius swordsman, but his personality is too casual. Being his caregiver will be very exhausting. Ludi lowered her eyelids, remembering Hein's lazy appearance. I know him very well. Back when I was the Saintess, he caused me no end of trouble. Gran turned around and looked at Ludi with a serious expression. If you encounter any serious problems, you must tell me. No matter what it is, I am prepared. Thought to help you at any time. Ludi stood frozen, her pupils widening slightly as a blush crept onto her cheeks. Thank you very much. Hearing you say that gives me great strength, Lord Gran. Gran's lips curled up slightly, his gaze tender, his cheeks tinged with a faint pink. Good luck. Ludi nodded vigorously with a brilliant smile. I will. She stood before the Grand building, her back straight. She took a deep breath. From today on, I finally begin my role as Hein's caregiver. There are two things about him that are very suspicious. Hein was running behind the temple with a panicked look. Ludi had witnessed this scene. On the day I was murdered, Ludi's brow furrowed, her gaze lowered. For Hein to lose his composure like that, something extremely unusual must have happened. Perhaps it was after he disposed of me, the Saintess. Another possibility is that woman who lured Lord Gran away. She used to be Hein's caregiver. According to the High Priest's investigation, she resigned and left before my funeral. She was supposed to return to her home in the countryside, but there has been no word since. It's all too suspicious. Ludi stood in the corridor with a solemn expression. There are already several caregivers around Hein. Maybe I can get some information from them. First, I need to get on good terms with them. She raised her hand and knocked lightly on the door. The door was suddenly pulled inward, and a male servant wearing round-rimmed glasses rushed out. The two of them nearly collided. Ludi let out a cry of surprise. The bespectacled servant stopped and looked her up and down. Are you Ludi? Ludi immediately put on a smile. I am Lord Hein's caregiver. I just started working today. The bespectacled servant suddenly burst into tears. Ludi was bewildered. He turned around abruptly and shouted into the room. Hey, everyone look, the new scapegoat is finally here. Ludi was surrounded by 3 servants. Ah, thank you. I really couldn't take it anymore. He leaned into Ludi's ear with a twisted smile. Welcome to hell. You are the beacon of hope. Ludi stood frozen, her pupils trembling. This kind of passionate welcome actually makes me feel uneasy. The bespectacled servant pushed her back, forcing her into the room. All right, please come in. Ludi pushed open the door and was completely stunned by the sight inside. This is simply, the once magnificent living room was a wreck. The green sofa was stained with red blood. The wooden barrel was filled with various long swords, and broken porcelain and bloody handprints were scattered on the floor. Ludi's brow was covered in cold sweat, her back stiff. This is a completely different world from Lord Gran's tidy palace. The bespectacled servant looked dejected. Lord Hein's unpredictable personality always catches us off guard. At first, everyone admired Lord Hein. He performed brilliantly in the monster subjugations, and countless people vied to become his attendant. The bespectacled servant spread his hands and let out a long sigh. But in the end, everyone lost heart. No one could last long. We used to have many people, but now only these few are left. A maid tightly gripped Ludi's hand, her eyes full of admiration. I heard that you performed exceptionally well under that iron-fisted Lord Gran. You're practically a legend in the world of caregivers. Ludi gave a dry laugh, a drop of cold sweat on her temple. Is that so? It seems I've become the subject of rumors, for better or worse. Ludi's gaze drifted as she made her own plans. To make the investigation go smoothly, I'd better not stand out too much. The bespectacled servant patted Ludi's shoulder, his expression becoming excited again. Then I'll leave it to you, our promising newcomer. Lord Hein is in his room. Go and say hello to him. Please don't give up. Ludi stood before the tall white double doors, took a deep breath, and pushed one open slightly. Excuse me. She slipped into the room and froze at the sight. Bloodstains and scattered papers were everywhere on the floor. Overturned tableware and miscellaneous items piled up in the corners. This place is unbelievably messy. It looks like there's a lot of cleaning to do. The bedding on the large bed bulged, and a muffled groan came from within. The figure under the cover squirmed. Liddy took half a step back, her hands nervously folded. Sorry, are you resting? The covers were suddenly thrown back, and Hines sat up with a mess of hair. Silver strands covered half his face, and his collar was stained with dried blood. Liddy steadied herself. I just came to give a brief self-introduction. Suddenly, a hand reached forward. Liddy cried out as she lost her balance. She fell heavily onto the soft mattress, her back sinking into the covers. Hein flipped over and pressed down on her, his hands braced on either side of her body. His messy hair hung over his forehead, and the blood on his lapel was right before her eyes. Hein's gaze was vacant as he murmured, "Wait a minute. Why are you in my bed? Because you pull me in?" Ludi's expression was frantic. He's not fully awake yet. I have to leave here quickly. From today, I am Lord Hein's attendant. My name is Lulu. So, could you please let me go? Hein turned his face away, his gaze falling on her in silence. Hein leaned down and buried his face in the crook of her neck. Ludi's body stiffened. Wah, wait a minute. Hein closed his eyes, his nose lightly brushing against her neck. Lulu smells nice, like a puppy, not basking in the sun. Ludi looked shocked. A puppy? What kind of smell is that? Hein leaned close to her ear, his breath warm and comforting. Ludi cried out and hunched her shoulders. Hein's eyelids drooped with a weary expression. I'm sleepy again. Sorry. His body tilted as he fell back onto the pillow and drifted into a deep sleep. Ludi sat on the edge of the bed, watching the sleeping man with a complex expression. He's really asleep. This guy's behavior is completely unpredictable. Being Hein's attendant is going to be incredibly difficult. A week later, the difficulty was far beyond her imagination. Hein walked barefoot in the corridor, soaking wet, water dripping from his hair. Ludi chased after him, holding her skirt and shouting, "Don't run around soaking wet." Hein sat at the dining table, staring at the green vegetables on his plate with a frown. I don't like eating this. Ludi pointed at the plate and spoke firmly. Please eat at least some vegetables. Hein huddled under the covers. 5 more minutes. Ludi pulled hard on the corner of the quilt, her temple throbbing. The temple is summoning you. Ludi slumped in a chair, her expression exhausted. I'm dying of exhaustion. If I don't get used to this busy life soon, I won't have any time to investigate. The male servant patted her shoulder, and another maid approached with a teacup. The male servant pushed up his glasses. Good work, star newcomer. Have some tea. Ludi took the cup, her fingertips trembling slightly. Thank you very much. She sipped the hot tea as steam rose. You guys are amazing. To think you've been able to remain as Lord Hein's attendants for that selfish man. We're just the old employees who stayed because the newcomers kept resigning. Lulu is the one who's truly amazing, to be able to speak your mind directly to Lord Hein. Ludi lowered her eyes with a bitter smile. He doesn't listen to anyone anyway. The male servant's expression grew passionate. Lord Hein has enough achievements to offset his capriciousness. For example, in the war with the neighboring country a few years ago, he killed 300 enemies single-handedly. The maid pushed her glasses up. If Lord Gran is the Purple Reaper, then Lord Hein is the White Sword Saint. Although he's usually a slacker, he performs excellently on the battlefield and in monster subjugations. The male servant spread his arms. His swordsmanship is enough, not to make even men swoon. And surprisingly, he never misses swordsmanship practice. Caring for him is indeed hard, but somehow you feel like you can't just leave him alone. Ludi sipped her hot tea thoughtfully. I could never do that kind of sweaty, hard work. You look like the type of person who wastes their life away for the sake of effort. Hein's past words echoed in her mind. She had thought he was just an arrogant jerk who looked down on others because of his talent. But perhaps there was more to him than that. Back when she was the saintess, people who didn't know her at all would always judge her with prejudice. That didn't feel good. She wanted to truly understand what kind of person Hein was. The male servant held up an index finger with a fanatical expression. Speaking of Lord Hein's swordsmanship, the most shocking move is that one, the thrust that pierces the heart in one blow. Ludi, her pupils shrank and cold sweat slid down her cheek. A thrust to the heart. That's the mark left by the weapon that killed me. The male servant rushed into the room with a panicked look, gasping for breath. Something terrible has happened. Lord Hein, Ludi stood up abruptly. What happened? A powerful monster appeared at the palace's back gate. The royal knights can't handle it at all. Lord Hein happened to be there and is currently fighting it alone. The monster opened its bloody maw and let out an ear-splitting roar. Hein gave a yawn, his expression lazy. Ludi stood with her teacup, her brow furrowed. To think such a strong monster would appear at this time. Will even Hein be in danger? This is an emergency. The male servant and the maid looked at each other with solemn expressions. Oh, how terrifying. Wait, could this be? The male servant suddenly grabbed Ludi's shoulders, a light flashing across his glasses. This is a learning opportunity, newcomer. Ludi stood frozen, her pupils trembling slightly. A drop of cold sweat appeared on her temple. Huh? Ludi's eyes widened. Lord Hein is fighting, and this is an opportunity for me? The male servant gripped her shoulders. Newcomer, you haven't seen him fight yet, have you? Leave the work to us and go see it for yourself. The maid pushed up her glasses. His swordsmanship. That is absolutely not to be missed. Ludi gripped the front of her clothes. Everyone, aren't you worried? Lord Hein might be hurt by the monster. The male servant's expression froze. What are you saying? Lord Hein will never lose. Ludi was pushed forward, stumbling. You guys actually trust him that much? The male servant pushed up his glasses. You'll understand once you see it with your own eyes. You'll definitely be captivated by him. Ludi looked hesitant. That man really is. The setting sun dyed the palace gates red, its afterglow spilling over the iron railings. A giant serpent monster opened its bloody maw, its red pupils locking onto its prey as it let out an ear-splitting roar. Ludi hid her body behind a tree trunk, trembling slightly. That monster was truly more massive and ferocious than she had imagined. Where was Hein? He was there. Hein stood facing the giant serpent, dragging a long sword in his right hand, his white cloak fluttering in the wind. Hein lowered his eyes, his expression appearing languid. Being a gentleman is such a pain. Hein drew his sword with one hand, the purple blade pointing diagonally toward the ground. Let's finish this quickly and go back to eat cookies. The giant serpent lunged to bite. Hein sidestepped, his white cloak drawing an arc in the air. He suddenly leaped up, his figure like an afterimage as he swept past the serpent's body. The monster swung its tail in a horizontal sweep. Hein tumbled in midair, his toes lightly touching the serpent's scales, using the momentum to soar higher again. He thrust downward, his long sword erupting with blue light, precisely slicing open the monster's back. Blood splattered everywhere. A wound bloomed on the serpent's back as blood sprayed out. Hein landed steadily. I could have been too shallow. The demon serpent let out a shrill hiss, its red pupils fixed intently on the man before it. Hein reversed his grip on the hilt. The scales are quite tough. In that case, he lowered his center of gravity, gripping the long sword with both hands and holding it horizontally in front of him. Hein swung the sword. A blue light pierced through the demon serpent's skull. Blood poured down like rain. The serpent looked up, letting out its final cry, its body collapsing powerlessly backward and crashing heavily onto the ground. Hein sheathed his sword, a few drops of blood on his face. Then I'll just attack your weak point. Ludi, hiding behind the tree, witnessed everything, her pupils trembling with shock. Incredible. His swordsmanship and combat instincts are on a completely different level. Moreover, his fighting stance was like a dance. Ludi watched the battlefield, her brow furrowing slightly. But why is Hein fighting alone? She turned to look at several royal knights gathered in the distance. The Royal Knight Corps should have been here too. Even if they couldn't wound the monster, they should at least be supporting him. The knights were leaning on their spears, chatting with frivolous smiles on their faces. Fortunately, someone from the Four Holy Knights came. That white sword saint, being praised by everyone must feel great, right? At a time like this, he really ought to work harder than us. Ludi's brow furrowed tightly as she watched the distant knights. What kind of attitude is that? She had heard some rumors about the Royal Knight Corps. Don't think too highly of the popular Four Holy Knights. Even so, a knight spread his hands, a mocking curl on his lips. Just let him fight to his heart's content. Anyway, he's a genius, unlike us ordinary people. It would be even more interesting if he and the monster died together. The knights burst into laughter. Then all the credit would go to us. Ludi turned her head sharply, her eyes cold. I really cannot just stand by and watch. She stepped forward, her back showing her determination. The demon serpent let out a pained whimper, its massive body twitching violently as it rolled frantically on the ground. Hein! He stood up unsteadily, his silver hair soaked with blood. Hein raised a hand to wipe the blood from his cheek. Phew! I am exhausted. If I go back covered in blood, Lulu will definitely nag me again. At least clean yourself up before coming through the door. The image of her lecturing him with hands on her hips flashed through his mind, even though it has nothing to do with her if I get dirty. She really is a strange one. Hein turned his head, his gaze falling on the distant nights. Those guys. He's a genius, unlike us ordinary people. A curve formed at the corner of Hein's mouth, but there was no smile in his eyes. Oh, the Royal Night Corps. Hein lowered his eyes. That jealousy and resentment are even more irritating than usual. I really wish they'd stop venting their inferiority complex on me. I've had enough. Hey, you guys. Liddy stood before the knights with her hands on her hips, anger burning in her eyes. I've been listening for a long time now. Hein turned his head slightly, his eyes reflecting that petite figure. His expression was somewhat bewildered. Liddy pointed at the knights' noses and shouted, "What on earth are you blabbering about? Lord Hein, save your lives. Not only do you not apologize, but you're here. Not talking nonsense." A knight let out a sneer. Huh, who does this little girl think she is? Liddy puffed out her chest. I am Lord Hein's attendant. Don't you feel ashamed, sheathing your swords and pushing the entire burden of slaying the monster onto one person? The knights looked stunned. W what? Liddy, Dot continued her stern questioning. You even said something about dying together. How dare you say such things about someone risking their life on the battlefield? Hein stood behind her, his expression blank. Whether someone is an ordinary person or a genius has nothing to do with their resolve to fight. Hein stood rooted to the spot, his pupils trembling slightly. One knight, overcome with shame and anger, yelled, "Shut up, you brat. You're just a lowly attendant." He suddenly reached out his right hand, clad in an iron gauntlet. Liddy gritted her teeth and stood her ground, unmoving. In an instant, Hein flashed forward, blocking the way in front of Liddy and pulling her into his arms. Liddy looked up. Lord Hein, with blood at the corner of his mouth. Hein turned his face slightly. Hey, were you just trying to lay a hand on her? The knights froze, cold sweat trickling down their temples. I was just. Hein gripped the sword hilt tightly, his knuckles turning white from the force as he shielded Liddy in his arms. I won't forgive this easily. Absolutely not. Hein Jandia, you've already defeated the monster. Hein lowered his eyes. It only took 5 minutes. It was easy. With blood on his lips, his eyes were full of mockery. Unlike that group over there who call themselves knights. They probably couldn't achieve this in a lifetime. The knights flinched, sweat pouring from their brows. Filled with shock, Hein gave a light chuckle. How pathetic, calling yourselves knights, yet unable to handle even one monster. Perhaps you should submit your resignations early. Liddy suddenly struggled. Stop provoking them. One knight gritted his teeth, his hands trembling as he gripped his sword. You and that woman, how dare you make fools of us? He suddenly drew his sword, pointing the blade forward and letting out a roar. Hein turned his face slightly, a cold light reflecting in his eyes. Since you've drawn your sword, then? He let go of Liddy, his right hand firmly gripping his sword hilt. In that case, even if you die, you'll have no right to complain. Hein moved like lightning, instantly knocking the sword out of the knight's hand. The knight let out a scream, falling heavily to the ground, his pupils shrinking in terror as he gasped. Hein approached the knight, sword in hand. Shall we continue? The knight scrambled to his feet, teeth gnashing. Curse you. Let's go. Hein sheathed his sword, watching the group flee in panic. Truly weak beyond salvation. Lulu, are you okay? Are you hurt? Liddy snapped back to her senses and quickly replied, I'm fine. Thank you very much. Lord Hein's swordsmanship was simply magnificent. Hein avoided her gaze, his expression looking a bit unnatural. It was nothing. That was just my normal performance. He lowered his head slightly, a faint curve appearing on his lips. Also regarding just now, thank you for standing up and speaking for me. Hein turned his back, his white cloak stained with blood, for lecturing those guys for me. Liddy stood frozen, her pupils trembling slightly. Hein suddenly jerked his head away, avoiding her gaze as a flush crept onto his cheeks. Liddy hurriedly chased after him. Please wait, Lord Hein. I feel like I'm gradually coming to understand Hein a little better. But at the same time, if he wanted to kill me as the Holy Maiden, that one strike would have been enough. Her suspicion of him being the killer grew stronger. Her pupils narrowed. I must confirm the truth one by one, just as I did with Gran. Hein dragged his long sword as he walked deep into the forest, his back looking lonely. Night fell. The mansion was brightly lit. A manservant pushed open the large doors, his expression excited. Tonight's dinner is to celebrate your successful monster hunt. Ludi stood behind Hein with a complex expression. The manservant spread his arms, pointing to the long table laden with desserts. We have prepared Lord Hein's favorite foods. Ludi stood to the side, a drop of cold sweat forming on her temple. Aren't these servants the ones who spoil Lord Hein the most? Hein lowered his eyes. He called out softly, Lulu, you're always suggesting that I have a balanced diet. Ludi was startled and responded somewhat hurriedly, yes. Hein looked at the exquisite cakes on the table. Compared to these sweets, I'd rather eat what you recommend. Hein lowered his eyes, a hint of testing in his gaze. If I eat those vegetables I hate, would you be happy? Ludi raised a finger to her lower lip, her expression hesitant. Well, although I think that would be remarkable, but Hein rested his chin on one hand, staring at the dessert cups before him, looking somewhat gloomy. Keep these desserts as snacks. Go prepare a proper meal for me. Hein crossed his arms, his expression becoming spirited. I'll eat everything, not a single bit left. The manservant adjusted his glasses and shouted excitedly, I'll go prepare it right away. Ludi stood frozen, her pupils dilating in shock. What on earth is going on? That willful demon King Hein has actually changed his ways? Ludi stared at the tomatoes on the cutting board, the image of Hein being a picky eater floating in her mind. Hated vegetables, hated fish. He was such a stubborn person. She picked up a tomato, her expression becoming subtle. This is practically a miracle. Lord Hein is actually going to eat vegetables. The servants gathered around Ludi, their voices excited. This is all thanks to Lulu, right? Ludi waved her hands frantically, her expression flustered. No, I didn't do anything. The manservant adjusted his glasses, his tone certain. As expected of a legendary attendant, Lulu, we'll leave Lord Hein in your care from now on. I really didn't do anything. Ludi stared ahead, her pupils trembling slightly as a bead of sweat formed on her temple. And why did things turn out like this? Ludi was sitting on a bench, and Hein was lying with his head in her lap. He was eating cookies. As a reward for finishing his vegetables, he had actually demanded a lap pillow. Hein held up the empty plate, anticipation in his eyes. Hurry and praise me. Is he acting like a spoiled child? As Hein lay in her lap, his cheeks flushed slightly. Could he really have become dependent on me? Everyone else had looked on with warm gazes before leaving, even thoughtfully closing the door. Ludi lowered her eyes, a drop of cold sweat on her temple. Now is a good opportunity. Perhaps I can take this chance to fish for information. Ludi put on a smile and praised him softly. I saw a new side of you today. Lord Hein, you're truly powerful. You didn't seem panicked at all. Hein pressed a fingertip to his lower lip. I suppose so. Previously, I heard that someone saw you running away from the back of the temple in a panic. I thought that was quite unusual. When was that? She pursed her lips tightly, her throat moving with difficulty. Let me think. I must continue questioning him here. It was on the day the previous holy maiden was murdered. Hein turned his face slightly, a hint of deep meaning flashing in his eyes. Was it then? Ludi lowered her eyes, her expression appearing somewhat awkward, her brow filled with unease. Hein suddenly sat up, a playful tone in his voice. Do you want to know? The reason I was panicking back then. Ludi looked up sharply, her eyes full of suspicion. I really want to know. Yes. Hein held up an index finger to his lips, a curve forming at the corner of his mouth. Come closer. Ludi held her breath, her eyes filled with wariness. Hein reached out, his fingertip gently tilting her chin up. The distance between them was mere inches. From outside the door came the sound of hurried footsteps, accompanied by a manservant's panicked attempts to stop someone. You can't just barge in. Please stop. Gran suddenly pushed the large doors open, his black cloak billowing behind him. This is an emergency. Everyone, get out my way. Ludi was startled by the loud noise. That voice just now. Gran burst into the room, shouting her name loudly. Lulu. Ludi's mouth hung open in shock. Gran. Gran stared fixedly at the two people on the sofa, his eyes full of shock and anger. His breathing became heavy and rapid. At that moment, the air completely froze.